I never believed in ghosts until my junior year at Millfield University. What happened in the old dormitory that semester changed everything I thought I knew about the world, and about myself. It started innocuously enough. I was a psychology major, fascinated by the human mind's capacity for self-deception. When my roommate Jake suggested we investigate the paranormal claims surrounding Blackwood Hall, the university's oldest dormitory, I agreed purely for academic interest. Students had reported strange occurrences there for decades, unexplained sounds, objects moving on their own, and shadowy figures in the hallways. "It's perfect for your psychology thesis," Jake had said, grinning as he pulled up old newspaper articles on his laptop. "You can document how suggestion and groupthink create false paranormal experiences." Blackwood Hall had been built in 1892 and served as the university's first student housing. The Gothic Revival architecture made it look like something from a horror movie, with its pointed arches, stone gargoyles, and ivy-covered walls. Most students avoided living there, preferring the modern dorms on the other side of campus. Only a handful of residents remained, mostly graduate students who didn't mind the building's quirks in exchange for cheaper rent. I convinced the university to let me conduct a month-long study, ostensibly examining how environmental factors influence student stress levels. They were happy to help, probably hoping I'd find logical explanations for the complaints they'd been receiving for years. My first week in Blackwood was uneventful. I set up recording equipment in the common areas and my temporary room on the third floor. The building was certainly atmospheric, creaking floorboards, rattling pipes, and drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. But these were easily explained by the building's age and poor maintenance. The other residents were an interesting mix. Sarah, a doctoral candidate in medieval history, had lived there for 2 years. She was quiet and scholarly, spending most of her time buried in ancient texts. Marcus, a graduate student in engineering, seemed immune to any supernatural suggestions, approaching everything with scientific skepticism. And then there was Elena, an art student who claimed to be sensitive to spiritual energy. I initially dismissed her as exactly the type of person prone to paranormal delusions. The first incident occurred on my 8th night. I was reviewing audio recordings in my room when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to pause outside my door. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. None of the other residents were awake, I'd seen them all retire hours earlier. I opened my door slowly, expecting to catch one of them sneaking around. The hallway was empty, lit only by the dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows between the doorways. But as I stood there, I heard the footsteps again, this time coming from the floor above. "Just old building settling," I muttered, closing the door. But sleep eluded me the rest of that night. The incidents escalated gradually. I began finding my recording equipment moved from where I'd placed it, always in the early morning hours between 2 and 4 a.m. My notebooks would be open to different pages than where I'd left them. Small objects in my room, pens, books, my coffee mug, would appear in places I was certain I hadn't put them. I documented everything meticulously, looking for patterns. The activity seemed centered around the third floor, where my room was located, and specifically around room 317, which had been empty for 3 years according to the housing office. During my second week, I decided to research the building's history more thoroughly. What I found in the university archives made my blood run cold. In 1923, a student named Thomas Whitmore had died in room 317. The official report listed it as a suicide, but the circumstances were suspicious. Thomas had been found hanging from the ceiling fixture, but there were signs of a struggle. His roommate, David Chen, reported hearing Thomas arguing with someone late at night, but when David investigated, Thomas was alone in the room. Even more disturbing were the reports from the weeks following Thomas's death. Students reported seeing a figure in the hallways, always late at night, always walking toward room 317. The sightings were so frequent that the university temporarily closed the building in 1924. When Blackwood reopened the following year, the incidents continued sporadically. Every few years, there would be a cluster of reports, footsteps, moving objects, and always the figure in the hallway. Room 317 had remained unoccupied for most of the building's history, with students requesting transfers whenever they were initially assigned there. I shared my research with the other residents over dinner in the common room. Sarah nodded knowingly, admitting she'd experienced strange occurrences but had attributed them to stress from her studies. Marcus remained skeptical, suggesting that knowing the building's history was now influencing our perceptions. Elena, however, went pale when I mentioned room 317. "That's the room," she whispered. "I've been dreaming about it for weeks. There's someone in there, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. "For someone to understand." That night, I decided to set up my equipment directly outside room 317. If there was paranormal activity, this would be the epicenter. I placed motion sensors in the hallway, audio recorders near the door, and even a makeshift electromagnetic field detector I'd borrowed from the physics department. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the same time I'd first heard the footsteps, the motion sensors triggered. I watched the readings on my laptop as something moved down the hallway toward room 317. The electromagnetic readings spiked wildly, and the audio picked up what sounded like whispered conversations, too faint to make out individual words. My hands trembling, I crept into the hallway with a flashlight. The motion sensors showed something directly in front of room 317's door, but I saw nothing. The whispers grew slightly louder, and I realized they were coming from inside the room. I tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked. It turned easily. The room was exactly as it should have been, empty, dusty, with furniture covered in old sheets. But the temperature was noticeably colder, and the whispers continued, seeming to come from the far corner where the ceiling fixture hung. As I stepped further into the room, my flashlight beam caught something that made me freeze. On the dust-covered desk, someone had written a message with their finger, "Help me find the truth." The whispers stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, I heard my own ragged breathing. Then, from behind me, came a voice, clear, desperate, and undeniably real. "He didn't kill himself." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. I was alone, but the voice had been so close I could have sworn someone was standing right beside me. "Who didn't kill himself?" I whispered into the darkness. "Thomas." The voice came again, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. They made it look like suicide. But I saw them. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that I was experiencing some kind of psychological break brought on by suggestion and stress. But every instinct told me I was communicating with something, someone, real. "Who did you see?" I asked. The temperature dropped further, and my breath began to mist. The old radiator in the corner began to rattle violently, and the covered furniture started to shake. "The society," the voice whispered. "The secret society. Thomas found out about them. About what they did to the other students." "What other students?" But the presence was gone. The temperature returned to normal, the radiator fell silent, and I was left alone with more questions than answers. I spent the next several days researching secret societies at Millfield University. What I discovered was a pattern of student deaths dating back to the university's founding, all officially ruled suicides or accidents, but all sharing similar circumstances. Young men who had been asking questions, investigating certain professors or student organizations, found dead under suspicious circumstances. The common thread was something called the Order of the Crimson Key, a secret society that supposedly didn't exist according to official university records. But I found references to it in old student newspapers and personal diaries donated to the archives. The order was rumored to control aspects of university life, influencing grades, career opportunities, and even administrative decisions. More disturbing were the initiation rituals described in some accounts. New members were required to eliminate obstacles to the order's goals, a phrase that appeared in connection with several of the suspicious deaths. Thomas Whitmore, I learned, had been investigating the order before his death. He'd been writing articles for the student newspaper about corruption in the university's academic departments. His final article, never published, was supposed to expose the order's influence over faculty hiring and student discipline. The night after I made this discovery, I was awakened by someone pounding on my door. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. again. When I opened the door, Elena stood in the hallway, her face white with terror. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Sarah's in trouble." We found Sarah in the common room, standing motionless in front of the large window that overlooked the campus quad. Her eyes were open, but she didn't respond when we called her name. She seemed to be staring at something outside, though I saw nothing but the empty quad lit by street lamps. "Sarah," I shook her gently, and she blinked, seeming to come back to herself. "They're coming," she said simply. "The men in the dark coats." Thomas showed me. "What men?" But Sarah had already turned and walked back toward her room, moving like she was sleepwalking. Elena and I exchanged worried glances. "This is getting out of hand," I said. "Maybe we should contact the university administration." "No." Elena grabbed my arm. "Don't you see? If the order is real, if they're still active, then reporting this could put us in danger too." I wanted to dismiss her concerns as paranoid delusion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Over the past few days, I'd noticed the same dark sedan parked outside Blackwood Hall at various times. When I tried to get a closer look, it would drive away. The next night, I decided I needed more concrete evidence. I set up a camera in room 317, hoping to capture visual proof of the paranormal activity. But when I returned to check the footage the following morning, the camera was gone. Something, had entered the room and taken it. That afternoon, I received an email from an account I didn't recognize. "Stop digging or join the others who couldn't leave well enough alone. This is your only warning." My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't paranormal activity, this was very human and very threatening. I tried to discuss the email with the other residents, but I couldn't find any of them. Sarah's room was empty, her belongings gone. Marcus hadn't been seen since the previous evening. Only Elena remained, and she was packing her things when I found her. "I'm leaving," she said without looking at me. "You should too. We can't just abandon this. If there's really some kind of conspiracy, then we're not equipped to handle it." She zipped up her suitcase and faced me. "Thomas couldn't handle it either, and look what happened to him." After Elena left, I was alone in Blackwood Hall. The building felt different now, menacing rather than merely atmospheric. Every creak and groan seemed ominous, every shadow potentially hiding an observer. But I couldn't leave. Not when I was so close to the truth. That night, I experienced the most terrifying encounter yet. I was awakened not by footsteps or whispers, but by the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. In the darkness, I could make out a figure, a young man in old-fashioned clothing. "Thomas?" I whispered. The figure nodded. When he spoke, his voice was clearer than it had ever been before. "They're coming for you tonight. Just like they came for me." "Who are they?" "The order still exists. They've evolved, become part of the university's power structure. Professors, administrators, board members. They control everything." "What do they want?" "To protect their secrets. To maintain their control." Thomas's form flickered like a candle flame. "I tried to expose them, so they eliminated me and made it look like suicide." "Why can you manifest now? Why are you showing yourself to me?" "Because you're in the same danger I was. And because..." He paused, his form becoming more solid. "Because you're not the first person I've tried to help." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "The other students who died, the suicides and accidents over the years. They were all investigating the order. And I tried to warn them all." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You mean you've been trying to prevent these deaths for decades?" "Yes. But I've failed every time. The order is too powerful, too well connected. They make the deaths look natural, and any investigation gets buried." "But why me? Why can I see and hear you when others couldn't?" Thomas smiled sadly. "Because you're like me. We're connected somehow, perhaps we're related, or perhaps we simply share the same stubborn determination to find the truth." Before I could ask more questions, Thomas suddenly looked toward the window, his expression changing to one of alarm. "They're here. You have to go. Now." I looked outside and saw several dark figures moving across the quad toward Blackwood Hall. They moved with purpose, and I had no doubt they were coming for me. "There's nowhere to run," I said. "Yes, there is." Thomas stood up, his form becoming more solid than I'd ever seen it. "But you have to trust me completely." He led me to room 317, and as we entered, the room began to change. The covered furniture disappeared, replaced by furnishings from the 1920s. The walls seemed to shift and shimmer, and I realized I was seeing the room as it had been when Thomas was alive. "What's happening?" "I'm showing you the truth," Thomas said. "The night I died, I discovered evidence of the Order's activities, documents, photographs, records of their crimes. I hid them before they came for me." He pointed to a loose floorboard near the window. "Everything is still there. The evidence that could destroy them." As I pried up the floorboard, Thomas continued his story. "The Order doesn't just influence university affairs. They're connected to business leaders, politicians, judges. They've been orchestrating careers and eliminating obstacles for over a century. The university is just their recruitment ground." Inside the hiding place, I found a metal box containing dozens of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be membership lists. Names I recognized: prominent alumni, current faculty members, local business leaders, even some state politicians. "Take it," Thomas urged. "Get it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. They'd entered the building. "How do I get out of here?" Thomas pointed to the window. "There's a fire escape on the building's east side. But be careful, they'll be watching all the exits." As I gathered the evidence, I realized something that made my blood freeze. Among the membership lists was a name I recognized: Dr. Patricia Hoffman, my faculty advisor and the professor who had approved my study of Blackwood Hall. "She set me up," I whispered. "She knew I'd find something. The Order has been watching you since you started asking questions about campus deaths for your previous research projects," Thomas confirmed. "They arranged for you to study here, hoping you'd either give up or have an accident that would discredit any findings." The footsteps were getting closer. Thomas's form began to flicker again. "I'm running out of energy," he said. "But I have enough for one last thing." "What?" "To make sure you survive long enough to expose them." Thomas walked to the door and, somehow, turned the lock. The footsteps stopped outside, and I heard voices, low, urgent discussions about how to get in. "Go," Thomas whispered, his voice already fading. "And remember, trust no one at the university. The Order's influence runs deeper than you can imagine." I climbed out the window onto the fire escape, clutching the metal box of evidence. As I descended, I could hear the men breaking down the door to room 317. By the time they entered the room, I was already on the ground, running across the quad toward the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I drove away from campus, I saw several dark sedans converging on Blackwood Hall. In my rearview mirror, I could see lights going on in the building as they searched for me. I drove straight to the office of the local FBI field office, walking in at 5 a.m. with my box of evidence and a story that sounded completely insane. But the documents spoke for themselves. Within hours, federal agents were conducting raids across the state, arresting members of what turned out to be a criminal conspiracy spanning multiple decades. The Order of the Crimson Key wasn't just a secret society, it was an organized criminal enterprise involved in everything from academic fraud to murder. The evidence Thomas had collected in 1923 was just the beginning. Over the years, they'd expanded their operations, using the university as a recruitment center for future business and political leaders who would owe their success to the Order's influence. Dr. Hoffman was arrested at her home that evening, along with 12 other university faculty and staff members. The raids continued for weeks as investigators unraveled the full extent of the conspiracy. But the most shocking discovery came when forensic investigators exhumed Thomas Whitmore's body. The autopsy revealed clear evidence of murder, injuries consistent with a struggle and strangulation before he was hanged. Similar evidence was found when they exhumed the bodies of other supposed suicide victims over the years. Thomas had been telling the truth all along. The story made national news, and Millfield University faced federal investigations that led to the resignation of nearly half its administration. Blackwood Hall was closed indefinitely as a crime scene, and I testified before a grand jury about my experiences there. But here's the twist that still haunts me. During the investigation, I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about myself and my connection to Thomas Whitmore. My full name is David Chen Jr. My grandfather was David Chen, Thomas Whitmore's roommate in 1923. According to family documents I'd never seen before, my grandfather had been traumatized by Thomas's death and had spent years trying to prove it was murder. He'd conducted his own investigation but could never find enough evidence to convince the authorities. The stress and frustration had consumed him, and he died young, still obsessed with clearing Thomas's name. My grandfather had passed down his research to my father, who had passed it to me without my knowledge. It was stored in boxes in our attic that I'd never bothered to explore. In those boxes, I found my grandfather's notes, his theories about the order, and even early drafts of articles he'd tried to publish about the conspiracy. I had been drawn to study paranormal activity at Millfield University not by academic interest, but by inherited purpose. Somehow, Thomas had been calling to me through the generations, waiting for someone from the Chen family to return and help him find justice. The most chilling discovery was a letter my grandfather had written but never sent, addressed to future generations of our family. If something happens to me, know that Thomas Whitmore was murdered for trying to expose the truth about the Order of the Crimson Key. I could not find justice for him in my lifetime, but perhaps one of you will have better luck. The dead cannot rest until the truth is known. Thomas had been reaching out to me not just as a fellow truth seeker, but as the grandson of his closest friend, the one person who had witnessed his final days and never stopped believing in his innocence. On the night before Blackwood Hall was demolished, I returned one last time. In room 317, I felt Thomas's presence, but it was different now, peaceful, grateful. "Thank you," his voice whispered, fainter than before but unmistakably real. "I can rest now." "Will I see you again?" I asked. "Not in this place. This chapter is finally closed." His voice grew even fainter. "But the truth has a way of calling to those brave enough to seek it. There are other mysteries waiting, other injustices that need champions." As I left the building for the final time, I understood that my experience at Blackwood Hall had changed me fundamentally. I was no longer just a psychology student interested in debunking paranormal claims. I had become someone who understood that truth exists in forms beyond our normal comprehension, and that sometimes the dead really can guide the living toward justice. The Order of the Crimson Key was destroyed, but its legacy lived on in the dozens of families who finally learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths. Thomas Whitmore's name was cleared, and he was posthumously honored by the university as a student journalist who died in pursuit of truth. But I know the real honor came from something much simpler. A lonely spirit finally found peace after nearly a century of trying to right a terrible wrong. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm researching other unexplained deaths and mysterious disappearances, I can still feel Thomas's presence, not haunting, but encouraging, reminding me that truth is worth fighting for, even beyond death. The paranormal activity at Millfield University turned out to be very real, but it wasn't about ghosts trying to scare people. It was about justice delayed, love transcending death, and the power of truth to heal wounds that span generations. I never did finish my original thesis about psychological explanations for paranormal experiences. Instead, I changed my major to investigative journalism, following in Thomas Whitmore's footsteps. Because I learned that some mysteries can't be explained away, they can only be solved. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.